The deck that I will build today is one I like to refer to as Yangzing version 1.0, aka Gustos. Like Yangzing, Gusto is a deck that is principally built of floaters that typically take an initial defensive posture to set up strong combination plays to produce victories. However, unlike Yangzing's, most generic Gusto builds have trouble winning by 100 cuts, i.e., they inflict 1200 damage with one turn, then 1600 damage the next turn, then 900 damage in the turn after that one, etc., etc., etc. Therefore, to construct the competitive Gusto deck, one has to take into consideration this battle feature. So what Gusto cards make it to the big leagues, and what cards should be left at home? Winda, Sage of the Gustos, like most of the higher level Gusto monsters, is not a quality card. With only 2,000 attack points, it does not have the high probability to receive its effect, and the reward of that effect is of limited value, typically being special summons of Pilica. However, if you want to use her effect, you have to deal with her restriction, and that makes the summons of lesser value. The least the card designers could have done was have the summons from Sage be unrestricted by battle position, but even that wouldn't have saved this card. Sphreez, Whirlwind of Gusto. If it was level 4 or lower, then it would warrant consideration, as the floating characteristics of lower level Gusto monsters makes the effect appealing. However, as tribute monster, the effect demands too much, either a special summons or a tribute, both of which are meaningful expenditures for this deck. Musto, Oracle of Gusto, is actually a decent card. The problem is its effect has almost no synergy with the general strategy of how Gusto decks run to execute their wins. As mentioned prior, Gustos do not poke away at an opponent's life points. They get life points in one or two big chunks. And this effect negation does little to actually aid that strategy. If the card negated the effect for as long as the target was on the field, then this card would definitely be side deck material, or maybe even better. But heck, even if the effect was quick play, then this card could make a much stronger case for itself, but that's just not the case. Caam, Serenity of Gusto, is the first, higher level Gusto monster, even though it's only level 4, that has a useful effect for the general Gusto strategy. Mid to late game, this card is really useful by adding back precious Gustos to the deck, as well as drawing a card. Also, Caam can, as a level 4, expands the ability to make higher level synchro plays if the situation demands it. Gusto Thunder is one of many possible searchers for the deck and has its strengths and weaknesses. The chief strength of Thunder is that its summons effect does not occur until after the battle phase. Thus, one can summon a Pilica with the effect, get her effect without concern for Pilica being destroyed via battle. Thus, she exists on the field for you to interact with her next turn. However, this strength is also a double-edged sword, because if the opponent swarms, then the summons of Pilica or anything else may never occur because the duel will be lost during that same battle phase. Also, banishing cards from the graveyard instead of returning them to the deck hurts unless the deck is really convolutedly designed with some strategy to mitigate this banishing. But if this is the case, it will significantly decrease the ability to win because you're going to be significantly increasing consistency. Realistically, while Thunder can get any Gusto Psychic monster from the deck, including Sage or Whirlwind, it really is not a good card for the typical Gusto build. Pilica, Descendant of Gusto, is the key monster for the deck. If this card were ever limited to 1 or banned, any hope of a competitive Gusto deck would instantly die. Pilica sets up your major damage combinations through its ability to summon die Gustos free. Pilica also provides high-quality defense, not directly but indirectly, as her summons produces a floater that will exhaust your opponent's attacking potential. The wind restriction for summoning associated with her effect is definitely necessary to ensure balance, although it can get annoying at times. It's not overly restrictive, for there are a number of ways to special summon Pilica during your opponent's turn, get her to activate her effect, and then have no restriction during your turn when you want to make any type of synchro play. Finally, the effect negation portion of the effect is not very restrictive because all the effects associated with Gusto tuners that you'll actually be summoning activate in the graveyard. 3 copies is a must, or just give up attempting to run Gustos. For Gusto Condor, read the first sentence, then look at the attack power of the card. Yeah, that should quell any thoughts of running this card. Interestingly enough, this card can actually be a viable tech in a non-Gusto Psychic deck with certain deck design choices, but in Gusto, this card does not work, for its effect is too lackluster. Gusto Gulldo is a must at 3 copies. It is the only level 3 Gusto tuner, thus it is essential in combination with Pilica for making your most important synchro play, Die Gusto Sphreez. It also starts the largest damage chain when Sphreez is on the field. If those critical elements were not good enough, it has the most flexibility in activating its special summons effect. Finally, for this particular deck design, this card actually has another advantage that will be discussed later. I believe Winda, Priestess of Gusto, is superior to Caam, so I run 3 copies. The reason for its superiority is the nature of special summoning itself. Winda's effect is similar to that of an elemental searcher, which can trigger either face up or face down when it's destroyed as a result of battle, an advantage that Caam does not have. Winda is also typically the most effective way of getting Gulldo from the deck. The unfortunate aspect, of course, for Winda is that it has to be attacked. It doesn't get its effect when attacking, which hurts the damage chain a little bit, but still, I think it's far superior to Caam. Gusto Griffin is a tech card that demands a specific build to maximize its efficiency. Overall, Griffin is let down by the fact that the higher level Gusto monsters are not very good. Thus, its effect is more limited to summoning the lower level monsters, where the specifics of deck design to increase the probability of this effect seem to conflict with the general efficiency of the overall Gusto strategy. Basically, the deck design strategy for Griffin conflicts with the deck design to maximize overall Gusto efficiency in general. And it's too bad for Griffin that the higher level Gustos just aren't good, thereby making Griffin itself rather irrelevant. Gusto Falco has 2 major weaknesses. First, it does not get a special summons effect when destroyed as a result of battle, which is the most common way a Gusto monster is going to die. Second, the card is special summon in face down defense mode, which heavily limits the ability to produce clean fluid combinations during your turn. The face down aspect basically stops any real combinations you're attempting during your turn. Incidentally, if the special summons could be face up attack mode, this card would work well in this deck, but it's not. I talked a little about my distaste for Caam, Hope of Gusto, when discussing Winda, but let's a little more elaboration. The problem with Hope is that outside of Falco, all Gusto monsters special summon other Gusto monsters face up. Therefore, you only get Hope's effect when set from the hand or through Falco's effect. Well, as previously mentioned, I don't run Falco, and I think it's generally a bad card, so Hope only works when set from the hand. That's just too slow, and overall the effect is just inferior to Winda. Gusto Squirrel really suffers from the same problem as Griffin. A more specific deck build is required to maximize its effects, but that type of deck build hurts the overall efficiency of the deck in general, and the higher level Gusto monsters, again, they're just not good. Gusto Egul is another card that should be run at 3. There really is not much to say about this card beyond it is important in efficiency. It's the principal special summons target that will get Pilica, and it also has a meaningful role in the big damage chain that's going to net Gustos most of their damage most of the time. Moving on to the Gusto Synchro monsters, Gusto Egul is kind of killed for me by the effect occurring in the end phase. The effect already demands a banishment from the graveyard instead of returning it to the deck, so the end phase requirement produces almost no advantage because it can't be utilized for the current turn attack push. If this card did not have the end phase requirement, then it would be worth something. Or if it allowed you to destroy one spell or trap card instead of one face down card, it could be worth something because it would be an effective tool against pendulum summoning. But that's not the case. Gusto Sphreez is the key card of this deck. The chief victory strategy of the Gusto archetype revolves around this card. The goal of any duel when you're dueling with Gusto is to get this card on the field with a Guildo in hand and go from there. However, despite its importance, I only run 2 copies because, thanks to Caam, it can be returned to the extra deck, freeing up an extra spot for the extra deck. Gusto Gulldo is not a bad card, but it's also not a very good card for my deck design. The big problem with this card is it's a level 5, and Gustos only have one level 2 tuner in Squirrow, which, as mentioned, is a bad card for this deck. So the best way of making this card is either using Gulldo and a level 2, which can be tricky, or Egul and a level 4, which will almost always be Caam. Unfortunately, Caam and Gulldos are going to compete for resources for their effect activation, limiting the effectiveness of both cards. While in other Gusto decks this card may be fine at 1, in my design its usefulness is somewhat mitigated. Gusto Falcos has an effect that is in direct contrast to the principal strategy of the way I build this deck. If this monster had more attack points, like 1800, so by itself it would be at least 2400, then its inclusion would be debatable. Hey, you could use this card when you don't have the potential to set up your big damage chain. However, as only a 2000 attack synchro with no other secondary effects, this card is just not valuable enough. Gusto Emerald is a nice card in a lot of non-Gusto decks, but in a Gusto deck, you have Caam, and that fills Emerald's chief purpose, only more efficiently. Save Emerald for the non-Gusto decks. Use Caam in the Gusto decks. Gusto Phoenix is, at best, maybe the 3rd best rank 2 XZ, and if one wants to run rank 2s in this deck, I recommend selecting Sky Cavalry or Gachi over Phoenix. Contact with Gusto is a nice card in most Gusto builds, but I just don't have room for it in this deck. The lament with this card is that it does not remove the opponent's card in some manner other than destruction, but make no mistake, this card is good, it's just not good enough for me. While Dust Storm of Gusto covers all the bases, ensuring your Gusto monster's attacks go through, it's just too situational. Realistically, one would be better off running a card like Trap Stun instead, due to the increased versatility while retaining about 90% of Gusto's intended use. Although returning Gusto monsters from the graveyard to the deck is an important aspect of a successful Gusto deck, Blessings of Gusto can be a little too restrictive at times, especially when the Gusto it will special summons a vast majority of the time is Pilica, which may require removing the desired secondary special summons target that you would bring out with Pilica from the graveyard to summon Pilica. Overall, a generic revival card typically works better in my opinion. Whirlwind of Gusto is not good at all. The problem with Whirlwind of Gusto is that you cannot special summon either Caam or Pilica with its effect. Thus, the whole point of the card is to put a tuner or floater on the field, which can be restrictive as a lot of these targets will end up in the graveyard, not remain in the deck during the course of the duel. Thus, it'll limit the target option. Overall, I think this card was designed more in mind for a Sage or Oracle type build, which, as mentioned before, those just aren't good cards for the general Gusto victory strategy. Well, that closes the book on direct Gusto support, so what now? First, finishing up the monsters, I like to run 3 copies of Mathematician. Mathematician is a level 3, which allows you to go into Synchro level 6s that aren't Sphreez, and any level 4s you might be running. Also, its graveyard dump effect is obviously very nice for getting Gulldo into the graveyard to set up a Pilica combination. Finally, it never really hurts to have a 1500 attack point wall that produces a draw when destroyed as a result of battle. Moving on to the spells, I run the standard staples for me: 1 Raigeki, 1 Book of Moon, 1 Soul Charge, and 2 Dark Holes. Due to the importance of both special summoning in the deck and Sphreez's effect, I run 2 Mystical Space Typhoons because they are important to ward off those annoying traps like Vanity's Emptiness, Lose 1 Turn, Fiendish Chain. Not surprisingly, I run 2 copies of Creature Swap because of all the floating action that Gustos bring. I only run 2 copies because of deck space. If I had 1 more card spot, I'd probably put in that 3rd copy. Also, not surprisingly, due to the importance of Pilica, in this deck I run 3 copies of Emergency Teleport. Unfortunately, thanks to the emergence of Cosmos, for those in real life, if you don't have your emergency teleports, they're going to cost you a lot more money than they should. Rounding out the spells, I run what I think is my big tech card in this deck, Ancient Forest. The chief play strategy associated with Sphreez, it ties in nicely with Ancient Forest, in addition to Forest covering some of the Gusto weaknesses. To highlight this point, it is important to discuss the aforementioned Sphreez combination in detail. The chief reason for getting Sphreez on the field is its damage transfer effect. Battle damage taken with all Gusto monsters dealt to the opponent instead of the controller. With this effect, the general damage chain involves special summoning Pilica, either during your turn or your opponent's turn, and then special summoning a Gulldo with the effect of Pilica. Then, on your turn, if the special summoning of Pilica occurred during the opponent's turn, synchro summon a Sphreez, use its effect to return a Gulldo from the graveyard to your hand. It can be the same Gulldo used to synchro the Sphreez. Then normal summon the returned Gulldo and attack into the opponent's monster with the highest attack. When Gulldo is destroyed, use its effect to special summon Egul in attack position, attack into the same opponent's monster. When it's destroyed, use Egul's effect, special summon some other monster depending on the situation. When you want a card, you can summon Caam, because you already have 2 cards in the graveyard to return back to the deck. If you want more damage, special summon a Winda. Note that because of Winda's effect, it won't get any type of summons. The chain will just end with Winda. If you want more field control and you haven't used Pilica's effect during the current turn, you can special summon a Pilica. Finally, if so desired, you can attack with Sphreez itself because it can't be destroyed as a result of battle. Overall, assuming an opponent's monster has an attack of at least 2100, the chain in this situation can inflict up to 4700 damage to the opponent or 3600 damage and net a single draw. This chain works nicely with Ancient Forest because your monsters are being destroyed as a result of battle anyways in order to transfer the damage to the opponent. Thus, Forest's destroy at the end of the battle phase effect is irrelevant. Also note, though, that Forest does eliminate the ability to attack with Sphreez, which is fine because that damage is typically very low and generally irrelevant unless it's actually going to be used for the victory. Forest also helps manage the chief weakness of Gusto, which is incomplete defense. The big issue with Gusto is, while a number of its cards are floaters, those cards have a hard time ensuring field presence against an overwhelming force. Ancient Forest forces the opponent to either sacrifice the monsters on their board to destroy your monsters, or do nothing, which gives you extra time to set up your Sphreez combination. In short, Ancient Forest is just another significant layer of protection for Gusto that hurts the opponents much more than it hurts Gusto's. Finishing up the main deck with the traps, I run 4 of the general staples, 1 torrential, 1 bottomless, 1 solemn warning, and because of the importance of closing out that damage chain, 1 ring of destruction over compulse. Finally, I run 3 copies of Oasis of Dragon Souls for revival purposes, and the defense mode requirement is certainly superior for Gusto's versus Call of the Haunted, and because the monsters can actually still be destroyed as a result of battle, Oasis of Dragon Souls gets the thumbs up over something like Pinpoint Guard. Moving on to the extra deck, I run a mix of win synchros and non-synchros because, as previously stated, there are a number of ways you can get Pilica out during your opponent's turn, thus making her wind-only restriction irrelevant. First off, I run Trishula, Dragon of the Ice Barrier, not super difficult to summon, 1 Stardust Dragon, 1 Stardust Spark Dragon, for its protection effect is valuable when Ancient Forest is on the field, 1 Yazi. In my book, Yazi is Yazi, and if you can summon it, you should probably always have it in your extra deck. 1 Clearwing Synchro Dragon, 1 Goyo Guardian, 1 HTM Psyhemoth. I think dealing with those monsters that can't be destroyed by Ancient Forest when the Sphreez combination is unavailable, that's what HTS is for. Obviously, the 2 copies of Daigusto Sphreez. I run 1 copy of Old Entity Hastor. This is one of the new ancient gods. He's really a nice new win synchro for tag teaming Pilica and Egul. This really works well in this deck. 1 Lightning Chidori, 1 Exiton, 1 Totem Bird for spell trap negation, 1 Wind Up Zemanes, and I guess kind of a quirky little tech card I run is 1 Muzura Rhythm, the String Dijin, because when it attacks, it can become a 3,000 hitter. And with Ancient Forest on the field, that 3,000, you might have a clear field. That 3,000 might just be enough to win the game, or you might need just the 3,000 to get over some big attack point monster your opponent has on the field when you don't have the Sphreez combination available. Overall, for me, I think this deck can be competitive, but I typically only play it for fun because, as I stated in the introduction, I view this deck as kind of the first version of Yang Zing, and I think Yang Zing is definitely a superior deck, which I also like playing. However, maybe others, though, will find playing the Gusto deck a bit more enjoyable than playing Yang Zing's, because Yang Zing's is kind of an acquired taste. Well, that is my Gusto deck. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.